A liberal TV host, laughing at Barron Trump, thought the interview would be easy. But 18-year-old Barron shocked her with his replies. This is the viral moment everyone's talking about. The bright lights of the studio filled the room, making everything look sharp and professional. The set of The Morris Show was sleek and modern. Known for its strong political opinions and tough interviews, tonight's guest was Barron Trump. The air was thick with tension. Rachel, the host, was known for asking hard-hitting questions and often mocking her guests, but tonight she faced someone she hadn't planned for, the youngest Trump, a man who had mostly stayed out of the media spotlight. Barron's calm presence was in stark contrast to the eager, almost performative energy of the show. Rachel had a reputation for taking down big names, but this time she was about to face an unexpected challenge. Rachel, with her trademark mischievous smile, was ready to start the interview with a mix of light teasing and subtle condescension. She opened with a comment about Barron's privileged background, trying to set him up for a moment of awkwardness, something that would make him feel uncomfortable on live TV. It was the kind of question she often asked to make her guests seem out of touch with the average person. Rachel, you come from such privilege. Did you ever feel like you were living in a bubble? She was expecting him to show discomfort, maybe even a hint of defensiveness. But Barron, standing tall at 6 feet 7 inches, remained calm and composed. There was no hesitation or nervousness. His confidence was almost effortless. Instead of falling into her trap, he turned the question back on her in a way that completely shifted the dynamic of the conversation. Barron, everyone grows up in a bubble, Ms. Morris. Does that make me out of touch? The audience was taken by surprise. Barron's response was direct and thoughtful, showing no signs of insecurity. Rather than being the one to stumble, it was Rachel who was momentarily caught off guard. She had expected to take control of the interview, but instead, Barron had calmly flipped the script and now held the reins of the conversation. He wasn't just a guest on her show. In that moment he was running the show. Rachel, determined to take back control of the interview, leaned in with a familiar tactic. A political question aimed at Barron's father, Donald Trump. She knew that bringing up his father's controversial presidency would likely provoke some sort of reaction, something to make Barron appear uncomfortable or defensive. The audience was waiting for a slip-up, a crack in Barron's calm facade, and Rachel saw an opportunity to exploit it. Rachel, so, Barron, growing up with your father, who was one of the most controversial presidents in history, how did you handle his policies, his tweets, the way he spoke about people? Was there ever a moment where you felt embarrassed by anything he said? The audience braced for an emotional response, certain that Barron would stumble or hesitate. After all, Donald Trump's outspoken nature had made him a polarizing figure, and surely Barron, still young and with less experience in the public eye, would have something to say about it. But Barron, ever composed, surprised everyone. Instead of responding to Rachel's question about his father, he shifted the focus completely. His calm tone and unflinching demeanor caught Rachel off guard. Without hesitation he turned the tables. Barron, did you ever feel embarrassed by some of the things Joe Biden said? The room fell silent. Rachel blinked, momentarily stunned by the unexpected turn of events. The question was sharp, and it completely deflected the heat Rachel had hoped to apply to Barron. Instead of being pushed into defending his father, Barron had skillfully shifted the spotlight to Rachel's own political biases. The audience, sensing the change in momentum, began to murmur with surprise. It was a subtle yet powerful move, and Barron had just flipped the script. Rachel's confident smirk evaporated, and the once easygoing nature of the interview now seemed far from assured. The audience, too, seemed to realize that they weren't watching just another political jab session. They were witnessing a moment of political mastery from an 18-year-old who wasn't going to be bullied. Rachel, unwilling to back down and determined to regain control, leaned into a question that she believed would catch Barron off guard. She wanted to challenge his understanding of the struggles of everyday Americans, hoping to paint him as disconnected and privileged. She thought this would be the moment when Barron would flinch, perhaps stumble over his words, and reveal himself as just another out-of-touch member of the elite. But Barron, ever calm, stood firm. He wasn't about to give Rachel the satisfaction of showing vulnerability. Rachel, how can someone like you, with so much wealth and privilege, understand the struggles of the average American? She watched him closely, waiting for him to hesitate, waiting for him to show a flicker of discomfort. But instead of flinching, Barron leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and controlled as he turned the question back on her. Barron, I could ask the same about you, Ms. Morris. You live in a city with more privilege than some people could ever imagine. The words hung in the air. The audience, sensing the shift in power, erupted into applause. Rachel's face tightened as she realized her own privilege had just been pointed out so directly. She had expected Barron to be defensive or uncomfortable, but instead, he had not only stood his ground but also used her assumptions against her. His response wasn't angry or confrontational, it was calm and thoughtful, challenging her to reflect on her own position just as much as she had tried to challenge his. Barron's ability to stay poised and navigate her questions with such ease unsettled Rachel, leaving her with little ground to stand on. The audience, now fully engaged, could sense the change in the dynamic. Barron wasn't just surviving the interview, he was owning it. And Rachel, the seasoned host, was struggling to keep up. As the interview neared its final moments, Rachel, desperate to regain the upper hand, decided to take one last swing at Barron. She knew that, given his family name and the intense media scrutiny surrounding it, this was a vulnerable point. She figured that if she could cast doubt on his political ambitions, she might be able to knock him off balance. The question was loaded with implications, aimed at making Barron seem like a mere product of his father's fame rather than an individual with his own voice and identity. Rachel, so Barron, tell me, do you actually want to go into politics or are you just riding your father's coattails? Is it really about your own vision, or is it simply about the Trump legacy? She leaned forward, expecting the familiar defensive response, the hesitation that so many others had shown when confronted with their family legacies. She anticipated him faltering, maybe even conceding to the idea that his father's shadow loomed large over his every move. The audience was silent, waiting for a moment of weakness, ready to see if Barron would squirm or hesitate. But instead of flinching or dodging the question, Barron responded with a level of maturity and self-assurance that stunned the room. Barron, people assume I'm here because of my last name, but the real question is, why does the media expect me to be defined by it? The words hit like a hammer. For the first time that evening, Rachel was rendered speechless. She had been trying to box Barron into a corner, to strip away his identity and reduce him to nothing more than a byproduct of his father's fame. But in one simple, direct response, Barron flipped the entire conversation on its head. Instead of defending himself, he challenged the very premise of the question. His response was subtle yet powerful. It wasn't about deflecting, it was about questioning the narrative that the media, and Rachel by extension, had been trying to sell. It wasn't about Barron needing to prove himself as separate from his father, it was about why people expected him to be defined by the Trump name at all. The audience, who had been watching this back and forth with mounting tension, erupted into applause. Barron had taken control of the narrative once again, and this time, he did it with clarity and conviction. Rachel, clearly shaken, tried to recover. But the damage had been done. Barron had outmaneuvered her, making a powerful point that resonated deeply with the audience. The media, which often latched onto the legacy of famous families to tell their stories, had already boxed him in. And yet, here was Barron, standing firm, refusing to be defined by anyone's expectations but his own. Barron's composure was remarkable. Throughout the interview, he had remained calm, measured, and unfazed by the barrage of questions meant to provoke him. Each time Rachel tried to put him in a corner, he slipped past her, using his intelligence and perspective to turn the conversation back to her, forcing her to reflect on her own assumptions. In a moment that many viewers would later describe as a turning point, Barron had made it clear that he was not just an 18-year-old son of a former president. He was a young man with his own voice and vision. The applause continued as Barron sat back, his posture relaxed, his eyes unwavering. He wasn't just surviving the interview. He had completely turned the tables on Rachel, the seasoned talk show host. Barron Trump had not only outlasted her questions, he had taken command of the conversation and left a message that would resonate far beyond the studio. Rachel's earlier confidence was gone. The once controlled and sharply cynical atmosphere of the show had dissolved, replaced by an unexpected moment of respect for Barron's poise and self-assuredness. In a world where people expected him to falter, Barron had risen above, and had left Rachel, the audience, and even the viewers at home with a lot to think about. Barron Trump wasn't just participating in the media, he was rewriting the rules of how he would be portrayed. And the world was watching. As the interview reached its closing moments, the shift in power was unmistakable. What had started as a carefully planned ambush for Rachel, an opportunity to poke holes in the persona of the youngest Trump, had slowly transformed into a battle of wills. Barron, the 18-year-old son of a former president, had not only survived the onslaught of pointed questions but had turned the tables with a level of poise, confidence, and intellect that few could have predicted. Rachel had entered the interview expecting a nervous, inexperienced young man, someone who would buckle under pressure or show signs of discomfort. But Barron was anything but predictable. Instead of stumbling, he remained unshaken by her barbs. His responses were not just well-articulated, they were sharp and insightful, leaving her with no room to maneuver. Each time she tried to land a blow, he parried with ease, turning the focus back on her and her assumptions. By the end of the show, it was clear to everyone who the true winner was. The audience, once eager to see Barron falter, now saw him as a composed and formidable force. His calm and collected nature, coupled with his incisive responses, earned him a standing ovation. They respected the way he had handled not just the questions, but also the tone of the interview. Barron had become a master of the narrative, and it was evident that Rachel, the seasoned talk show host, had been outclassed. Rachel, now visibly flustered, tried to salvage the situation with a forced smile. She attempted to regain control of the conversation with a final, hollow attempt at lightheartedness. But the damage had been done. Deep down she knew she had been bested. Barron Trump had proven that he was not just a product of his famous family. He had shown that he could think for himself, handle the pressure, and challenge the very system that sought to define him by his last name. As the cameras began to fade out, Rachel's once confident smile slowly vanished, replaced by a sense of resignation. The crew, the audience, and viewers at home could all sense it. The young man who had entered the studio as the underdog had just walked out as the true victor. The narrative Rachel had tried to craft, the one that painted Barron as nothing more than an untested, privileged teenager, had crumbled under his unwavering calm and sharp intellect. For Barron, the interview was more than just a media appearance, it was a declaration of his agency, of his ability to stand on his own and be heard, regardless of the weight of his last name. And for Rachel, it was a humbling moment of realization. She had underestimated Barron Trump, and in doing so, had become the latest victim of her own narrative. As the final credits rolled, the world was left with a new perception of the young Trump. No longer just a background figure in his family's legacy, Barron had proven himself to be a force to be reckoned with in the media world. And in that moment, the power dynamic had forever shifted. In the aftermath of the interview, the media erupted with reactions that flooded news outlets, social media platforms, and commentary channels. Clips from the show were shared widely, with headlines that ranged from astonished to admiring. The world watched in awe as Barron Trump, at just 18 years old, had effortlessly outmaneuvered one of the most seasoned talk show hosts in the business. What had been expected to be a moment of mockery for Barron had instead become a defining moment in his public life. A masterclass in composure, quick thinking, and the ability to control the narrative. The interview, which was initially framed as another political spectacle aimed at taking down a member of the Trump family, quickly evolved into something much larger. Barron had not only held his own but had completely flipped the script on Rachel Morris, the host, leaving her visibly flustered and scrambling to regain control. It wasn't just about surviving the interview, it was about reshaping how people viewed him, not as an extension of his father's legacy, but as a young man capable of thinking for himself, of questioning the media's assumptions, and of standing firm in the face of relentless questioning. The media began to dissect the interview from every angle. Political commentators, media analysts, and public figures all weighed in. Many expressed shock at how Barron had handled the barrage of questions, with some even praising his maturity and clarity. Others reflected on how the younger generation was increasingly challenging traditional narratives, using their platforms and voices to shift conversations and influence public opinion. For the Trump family, the interview became a moment that defied the usual portrayal of their members. Barron had broken away from the typical mold, distancing himself from the public image that had been cast upon him. Instead of being another member of the Trump legacy, Barron had carved out a space where he could speak for himself, asserting his own identity and challenging preconceived notions of privilege, power, and legacy. As the interview continued to trend online, the most striking takeaway was the shift in perception. Barron Trump, the young man many had dismissed as a mere product of his father's fame, had proven that he was more than just a political pawn. He was a force in his own right, capable of navigating the complex media landscape with ease and confidence. The moment became symbolic of the changing tides in media, where even the most seasoned figures could be outsmarted by a younger, more agile opponent. It was also a moment of reflection for the public, a reminder that even the most established narratives could be challenged by those who are not afraid to question, to think, and to act beyond their expected roles. The world had witnessed something extraordinary. Barron Trump had just rewritten his story, and in doing so, he had left an indelible mark on the media and political landscape. In the days that followed, Barron was no longer just the youngest member of the Trump family. He was a public figure in his own right, a symbol of the evolving political and media influence of the younger generation.